First of all, at the ICTR, we had the biggest ideologues of genocide. We had the people who planned the genocide, and therefore, the people behind what we see today, the rhetoric that comes out in denial, came first from the defense of the ICTR, from what the key ideologues were actually using to defend their actions in 1994. So when you see the arguments that are used today by ideologues, you actually realize a lot of those were the defenses that were used at the ICTR. The first one is about the plane crash. That is usually the biggest defense. And how it was used at the ICTR is that they are not responsible for the genocide because on the 6th of April, there was a plane crash where the father of the nation was killed by the RPF. And therefore, what followed was spontaneous. It was people rising up and doing things. It was not planned, and therefore they are not responsible for the genocide. So when people talk about the plane crash, in fact, it's a way of shifting blame, but it does not explain the fact that the moment the plane crash happened, you see something that has been planned for a long time. There is no explanation for the Interahamwe having been trained, for the Impuzamugambi having been trained as militias, for the lists of Tutsi victims that had been prepared. It does not explain how the genocide immediately was put into action. Immediately you see roadblocks going up. You see key Tutsi figures being killed first, and then later on, you see cabinet members being sent from the central government to go out into various parts of Rwanda to actually oversee the genocide. So today, the ideologues, when they start talking about plane crash, they are literally trying to confuse everybody. The theory of double genocide, that started at the ICTR. So you create a moral equivalence, and yet we know that the only recognized genocide of what happened in this country that is both legal and factual is the genocide of the Tutsi. And you find some people actually talking about in subtle ways that are nuanced, but it was not only the Tutsi who died. So while factually true, there are moderate Hutus who died, the reality is genocide has a specific definition. And when you look at it, it's a specific group of people, either ethnic, national, religious. So those are the people that are supposed to be, they are protected. And so what has been recognized is the Tutsi genocide. So when you say, but other people died, what are you trying to do? You're trying to say, since everybody died, there is no genocide against the Tutsi. And that started at the ICTR. When people use language of Rwandan genocide, it's not by accident. And ideologues, to be quite honest, they're very smart people. So when they say Rwandan genocide, that means Rwandans were targeted to be annihilated in 1994, which is not true. And so we must call that out. And that started also with the people at the ICTR. There's something that happens when they say shift the blame. When you're accused of genocide, go on the offensive and try the current government. And that is happening even when we are trying to get perpetrators extradited from different countries. They don't defend themselves for the most part. What they do is try to make it about the current government. They are murderers. You don't know who these people are. And it happens all the time. So those are the subtle ways of how these things are done, and they must be called out. The most important thing to understand is that genocides start through ideology. That's how it begins. Prior to 1994, if the government in this country had actually stopped the ideology and not promoted it, we would not have had 1994. So to be very clear, it is not a matter that is to be taken lightly. So when ideology is accepted and taken lightly, and you are told it's not as serious as it sounds, to be honest, that is not true. We have seen in this country what ideology can lead to. So those are the nuanced ways that people must be aware and look out for, that started with the key ideologues, but are continuing today with people in different parts of the world, and it must be called out whenever it happens. There's nothing that is happening in the DRC that did not happen in this country. Nothing. Not the rhetoric, not even the cannibalism. At the ICTR, we actually had cases where the fact that victims' body parts were actually eaten during the genocide, we had that evidence. So the same script, the same everything of what is happening in the Eastern DRC happened here in 1994. On the question of whose concern is it about ideology and perpetration, there is no way it is only an issue that concerns this country. And I'll tell you why. In 1994, this ideology was on the streets, perhaps contained within our borders, and you could say it was a concern perhaps of one jurisdiction. But how is it perpetrated at the moment? You have people that are using social media, sitting in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in France, and they're beaming that through YouTube and other social media into Rwanda. The fact that the language that is being used is Kinyarwanda does not mean that those countries are not concerned or should not be concerned. The intended audience, obviously, are Rwandans. So when you talk about freedom of speech is never absolute. Because our history has shown us in this country that words actually have the power to kill. And that's how it starts. So the same way genocide is perpetrated using state apparatus should be brought to bear to stop genocide ideology in the various capitals where it's happening. If you look at the statistics of who is accused of genocide denial, revisionism, minimization in this country, you will actually realize it's post-genocide generation. People who are teenagers, people who are in their early 30s, they were probably extremely young, 2, 3, 4 years old during the genocide. Why is that happening? When you see the proliferation of genocide ideology that is coming through YouTube, and you know in our country, people have smartphones, they can access this information very, very easily. And that's how you end up finding a 20-year-old killing a Tutsi neighbor who is a survivor. These are real life consequences. But how many states, in fact, have condemned this in their laws? Dr. Bizimana mentioned France. 2017, they extended the law against denial of the Holocaust to include genocides such as what happened in this country and others that have been found to have been perpetrated through UN courts, and those that have been recognized by the UN. But let me tell you how countries that don't take this seriously are going to have consequences eventually. There are cities in the world where you have big concentrations of Rwandan community. I have friends in Europe that tell me when they're walking on the streets, because of this ideology, they actually say they are Burundians. They don't want to say they are Rwandans. They say, I'm from Burundi, I'm from Uganda, because it actually has consequences. If you are, let's say, on the street of London, and you have a megaphone, and you're screaming and saying, cockroaches must be hunted down and killed, it has no impact, right? People are going to think you're probably crazy and take you to a psych ward, right? But if a Rwandan hears that, what happens? Because that is an order to hunt down Tutsi and kill them. So this country has enacted laws to make sure that people are held accountable to denial, revisionism, and all of that. But if you actually go to a country in the West and you tell them this person is talking about genocide denial, it should be condemned, the words that are used are usually innocuous, right? To a Western ear. If you say, cockroaches are bad, they need to be killed, somebody's going to tell you, of course, I will hunt down a cockroach and kill it. But that's not the meaning. So we must educate people everywhere what this means. What does it mean, genocide denial? And it has real life consequences. So that's the thing that people don't understand, especially the fact that freedom of expression is not absolute. There is no law in the world that says freedom of expression is an absolute right. And in every law in every country, you actually have exceptions. Even the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights has exceptions. Even the First Amendment in the US has exceptions. And those exceptions must be contextual, okay? So that's the understanding that people need to take away and know that if you have a concentration, for example, of Rwandan community in your country, if this ideology is allowed to fester and go unchecked because of freedom of expression, you are going to have members of the Rwandan community in those cities killing each other, okay? Those are real life consequences. And so states must enact laws, because if somebody is sitting in a capital somewhere in the West and is using social media to actually do genocide denial, it becomes extremely hard for Rwanda to ask for extradition if there is no reciprocity in the laws of those states. So laws must be enacted, there must be changes in order to stop genocide ideology.